Hello there, Charlie here. I'm a wellbeing coach with Isorropia, and today I'm delighted to be bringing to you a video on the topic of regulating mood. This video will bring to you some of the material that we deliver in-house and aims to outline the importance of regulating our moods, give clarity as to why we feel emotions, and most importantly, how we might start to better manage our emotions so that they no longer get the better of us. If you recognise yourself in anything that I bring to the table today, don't hesitate to join us this afternoon for our live Q&A, where you'll have the chance to bounce around some of your questions with our team of lived, experienced coaches. Now, on with the video. So, what is a mood? A mood is simply defined as a temporary state of mind or feeling, and is a state that we will generally describe as being good or bad. I'm in a good mood, or I'm in a bad mood. Moods can sometimes last for a while, and sometimes it can be tricky to work out exactly what's caused our mood in the first place. However, underneath every mood, whether we realise it or not, are a set of emotions or feelings which have caused us to be in that mood. In this sense, today, I want us to be looking at better understanding our emotions and feelings and how we can better manage them so we might quickly and efficiently lift ourselves out of our moods. Going back to the definition, the key word here is temporary. When we experience moods and emotions, it can be really overwhelming and feel like nothing at all will make it go away. However, as much as at the time it might feel like they won't, it's important to recognise that these intense feelings do pass. If we can begin to see our moods and emotions as temporary feelings that come and go, then we might begin to see them as less scary, less overwhelming, and even less meaningful. We can start to take some of the power away. But why is this going to be so important for your mental well-being? I want to start by asking you a question. What came first, your difficulty in managing your emotions or your mental well-being issues? Really, think about it for a minute. The reason that I ask this question is that many people I've spoken to find that the two, that is to say managing their emotions and their mental well-being, are inextricably interlinked. In fact, most mental illnesses, besides a select few such as bipolar disorder, schizophrenia or psychosis, are in large part a reflection of poor emotional processing. Emotions like sadness and anxiety are completely normal, but when we struggle to process and de-escalate these emotions, problems can occur. Think back to your own experiences of when you've been at your worst. Haven't they been in some way down to a feeling or emotion that has been felt to the extreme, and then struggling to work through that? In this sense, a difficulty in managing our emotions can be our mental well-being issue. For instance, we can consider the difference between depression and sadness. The difference isn't necessarily a difference in mood, but it is a difference in the magnitude and the time it takes for us to process the emotion. If you are recognizing yourself in this, then the good news is this is empowering. The good news is that the emotional regulation is a skill, and if we practice, we can start to improve. The one certainty in life is change, and life will inevitably throw us curveballs. To this end, emotional responses to difficult scenarios are totally normal and natural. However, the skill comes in learning to bring ourselves back down to a place of being level as quickly and efficiently as we can when we're feeling overwhelmed. We shouldn't aim to control our emotions, because that's an unrealistic and potentially damaging goal. Often, in a bid to control, suppress or avoid our emotions, we can create more problems for ourselves. We must recognise emotions are part and parcel of the human experience, and that although we cannot control our emotions, we can learn to better manage them and understand them. So, understanding the importance of emotional regulation. Why do we have emotions? What is the point in them? Something which is often forgotten is that all of our emotions, especially the painful ones, occur as a natural response to our environment. All of our emotions are in some way linked to survival, positive change, or serve to communicate our needs. In the context of our painful emotions, each and every one of them is trying to tell us that something needs to change in our environment. Think about it. Aren't all of your emotions trying to tell you something? For instance, when we feel anger, we feel it because there has been a perceived injustice, perhaps a crossing of a personal boundary. We might also feel anger if there is a threat, and that is closely linked to our fight and flight response. Anxiety serves to warn us of impending threat or danger. This can be a physical or emotional threat, like the threat to a job, a relationship, or reputation. Disgust, a feeling that we have when something is very displeasing, originally served to warn us away from poisonous or rotten food in the time of hunter-gatherers, again linked to survival. And jealousy is born out of a natural concern for a relationship. From this, what do you think your emotions are trying to tell you? What is it that needs to change in your life? It's important to note right away that feelings are not facts. Just because we feel something doesn't necessarily make it true. Simply feeling like something is a threat doesn't necessarily make it a threat. However, we can take from this that our emotions, however misguided they may be at times, are trying their best to be helpful. So what makes a negative emotion either healthy or unhealthy? Whether an emotion is healthy or unhealthy is all about whether it motivates us towards making positive change and action, or whether it hampers us in our ability to reach our goals. For example, anxiety is an unhealthy emotion because it often overestimates the threat or underestimates our ability to cope with the threat. An example would be if I had a job interview coming up. If I was extremely anxious, this may lead me to believe that I would not be able to cope, and consequently I might even cancel the interview. This would not be a positive action. However, feeling concerned about the interview would be perfectly natural, and my concern about being underprepared might lead me to take positive action by preparing for the interview through research, planning and practice. This, on the other hand, would be a very healthy and positive response. What is it that dictates whether we're feeling an unhealthy or healthy emotion at any point in time? A large part of it comes down to our thinking and interpretation of the situation. What we will tend to find is that our emotions are causing blocks in us making positive change, and are encouraging us to avoid or circumvent the problem. We are almost always thinking irrationally in that case. On the other hand, if we're able to gauge the situation accurately, strip it back to the facts and shift our distorted thinking, then we'll find ourselves tending towards healthy emotions, where we feel less overwhelmed and better placed to tackle the underlying issue head on. To this end, our thinking will play a huge role in how we feel and act in any given situation. What can happen if we're struggling with unhealthy emotions? When we're struggling with unhealthy blocking emotions, we can find ourselves naturally turning towards unhealthy coping strategies in order to avoid, suppress, or attempt to control our feelings. These are the kind of techniques we might use that help us to avoid or manage the emotion in the short term, but don't help us to fix the problems our emotions were initially trying to communicate, and therefore ultimately don't help us to resolve our emotions. These are the kind of actions that will bring us short-term relief, perhaps even pleasure. However, after the short-term fix has passed, it may leave us with feelings of shame, guilt, disappointment, or frustration. A few of these damaging coping strategies include isolation or avoidance, zoning out or numbing, suppressing, ignoring, or compartmentalizing the emotion, emotional displacement like arguing or bullying, outright avoidance of emotion, acting out, self-harm, alcohol or drug use, oversleeping, excessive gaming in a bid to escape our reality, excessive social media use, eating disorders and overeating, which can all be linked to control, and promiscuity. Do you recognise any of these feelings in yourself? Are there any you feel that I've missed out? It's okay to use these coping strategies from time to time, but if we make them a regular part of our coping repertoire, then we can run into problems. You may feel that these things help you in the moment, but they are not good long-term solutions. There's a saying about this: what you resist persists. If we resist an emotion rather than facing it and moving through it, we may find it hangs around a lot longer than we want it to. Whenever we experience an emotion, initially there is a trigger. This could be a person, place, conversation, argument, smell, or even a thought. Absolutely anything can be a trigger, and they are all personal to you. After the triggering event, we will find ourselves going through the evaluation process. The evaluation process refers to the way that we interpret the situation. That is where we are putting our focus, our meaning, and the inner narrative we are writing in association with the event. Our evaluation process is a combination of our belief system and our thoughts. Our beliefs act as a springboard for our thoughts, and consequently act as a lens through which we interpret the world around us. In fact, it is different unique belief systems that mean that everybody will respond to the same events in unique ways. Finally, depending on the meaning we have given a situation, we will then find ourselves falling into our emotions, and the quality of our evaluation will then determine if we fall into healthy, motivating, manageable, healthy emotions, or we might find ourselves feeling overwhelmed and encountering unhealthy emotions. An example to clarify this: imagine I was invited to a social event this coming week. The invitation could be the trigger. If I carry a belief that I'm not good at navigating social situations, then automatically I might find myself thinking thoughts like, I'm not going to be able to cope, my friends are going to think I'm weird. Consequently, I might find myself feeling anxious, and ultimately I might find myself deciding to avoid the situation entirely and make my excuses. On the other hand, if I caught my thoughts as they crept in and put my focus and attention on thoughts like, I've managed to see my friends before and I've had a good time, or my friends like me for who I am, that's why they're my friends, then I might find myself shifting from a place of anxiety to mild concern or even excitement. So, understanding the emotional process, how might we go about managing our emotions and improving emotional processing? The emotional process presents us with 3 solutions, namely, remove the trigger, change our evaluation, or manage our emotional response. The first question to ask yourself when looking at the trigger: is it practical to remove the trigger? The answer is actually, sometimes, yes. For example, if having the news on was causing you to become anxious, then turning off the television would be a practical and reasonable way of managing that. But many times it will not be practical or possible to remove the trigger, as it may frankly not be realistic, or we'll have to encounter triggering situations in order to reach our life goals. For instance, if I had road rage, it wouldn't be practical or possible to take every other car off the road. If public speaking is a trigger, but you want to become a teacher, it wouldn't be advisable to avoid public speaking altogether, as this is going to present you with its own issues. In cases like these, we'll need to look at our evaluation and our emotional response. To change our evaluation process, we must look at our thinking patterns and the way in which we interpret the world. Because our thinking can be ingrained, this can be really challenging, but we will give you some tools to help you with this. When it comes to our emotional response, if we find ourselves already in the moment of feeling an emotion, then there are still things that we can do to help ourselves calm down and act with our best interests at the centre of the picture. As we have experiences and learn to deal with them, these strategies will become habitual, like muscle memory. The wise mind is a wonderful tool that helps us to depict the 3 states of mind that we can find ourselves in at any moment in time. We can find ourselves in the reasonable mind, or rational mind as I like to think of it, the emotional mind, when we are overrun with our emotions and may struggle to think clearly, and finally, the wise mind. Put simply, wise mind is when we use both our emotions and our logical reasoning skills in order to decide the best actions moving forward. A lot of the time when we struggle with emotional regulation, we're not accessing our wise mind, but instead are functioning in either the emotional mind or reasonable mind. But what do all of these things really mean? The emotional mind is when a person's feelings control their thoughts and actions. We may find ourselves acting impulsively with little regard for the consequences. The emotional mind is when our thoughts and behaviours are being controlled by our emotions. We have lots of thoughts that might be unhelpful or distressing. We find it difficult to think logically and rationally. The facts are being distorted to fit with our current distress. They are entirely opinion. We may have strong emotions that drive strong behaviour. We concentrate solely on what we want to do, regardless of the long-term consequences. On the other hand, a person uses their reasonable mind when they approach a situation entirely intellectually. They plan and make decisions based on fact. The reasonable mind is intellectual and scientific, logical and uses rational thinking, factual thinking and entirely based on evidence, able to plan how to respond to a situation, able to focus attention, cool in approaching problems, and it focuses on what the individual thinks they should do. Acting solely in the reasonable mind can create its own issues, because a reasonable mind acts on facts and logic and ignores how we feel about a situation. Just acting in the reasonable mind can can lead us to making logically sound choices that don't necessarily make us happy. An example of this would be being offered two jobs. One that you enjoy a lot but that doesn't pay much, and another that pays a lot of money but which doesn't excite you. A reasonable mind might reason with you that you should choose the job that pays more money because it would leave you more financially secure. Although this works logically, it isn't necessarily the best choice for you as a whole. Finally, we have the wise mind. The wise mind integrates both the emotional mind and a reasonable mind. It adds intuitive knowing to emotional distress and logical analysis. It is the calm that follows the storm. It sees and knows directly and clearly. It grasps the bigger picture rather than just parts. It ensures the needs of both the emotional and reasonable minds are being met. The wise mind is a combination of our emotional mind and our rational mind. The wise mind allows us to react to our environment in ways which aren't self-defeating, is rational, and keeps in mind our long-term happiness whilst taking into account our feelings and values. A few questions to think on. Where do you spend your time? In the emotional, reasonable, or wise mind? What can you do to bring yourself back to the wise mind? We are all capable of using our wise mind. It's just a case of being more aware of our thoughts and feelings and then practicing. So we experience a trigger, an emotion arises. What next? We're not always going to be in a state where we can immediately access the wise mind, especially if we're not used to it. So what can we do to de-escalate our emotions to a point where we're able to? Some things which we can do to help level our emotions are positive distraction, for instance gardening, colouring, listening to a podcast, reading or doing a puzzle, talking to good listeners, positive self-talk, reasoning with yourself and self-soothing, meditation, exercise, breathing techniques, and sometimes the best thing to do is to take a break from the situation. In some cases, we will find that eventually we need to confront the trigger. However, even in these cases, it can be helpful to take the steps to calm the emotion before dealing with the situation. The stop exercise is a fantastic tool which helps us to not react destructively to our emotions, and it allows us to create time to de-escalate them. At its core, it's about creating space between the trigger and our response. With time, we'll get better at choosing our response rather than reacting impulsively. To better understand it, we're going to go through the exercise letter by letter. S, literally stop. Just pause for a moment. T, take a breath. Notice the breath as you breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. O, observe. What thoughts are going through your mind right now? Where is your focus of attention? What are you reacting to? What sensations do you notice in your body? Observe is about identifying the emotion, what the trigger was, and what the emotion is trying to tell you. Do you feel angry, jealous, anxious, depressed? What are the thoughts that you are having along with this? Remember, all of our emotions are trying to tell us something, and we will want to do our best to understand that message. P, pull back or put it in some perspective. Do not believe everything that you think. Take the helicopter view. This involves detaching yourself from the situation. Ask yourself, what's the bigger picture? What is another way of looking at the situation? What advice would I give a friend? What would a trusted friend say to me right now? Is this thought a fact or opinion? What is a more reasonable explanation? How important is this? How important will it be a week from now? What about a month from now? What about a year? Remind yourself, this too will pass. This is about asking ourselves, is this thought rational or irrational? Is it based on our assumptions or interpretations? Try to find evidence that will contradict any evidence you currently have against your thoughts. And finally, P, practice what works or proceed. Ask yourself, what is the best thing to do right now? What is the most helpful thing for me, for others, for the situation? What can I do that fits with my values? Where can I focus my attention right now? Do what will be effective and appropriate. Once we've carefully and fully assessed our emotions and the situation, including the pros and cons of reacting in a variety of ways, then it is time to express ourselves and choose our response. Remember that your response will have an impact on your future, and we want to act in a way that will best serve our future self. Remember that emotions can be a prompt for positive change, and that by looking to carefully choose our response, we can better not only our situation, but our mental well-being will stand to benefit massively as a whole. After all, life is 10% what happens to you and 90% how you react to it. If you've identified an area of need, then fantastic. We're going to be providing plenty more tools and techniques for all of us to start working on these areas through our workshops, which focus on specific areas, our Facebook Lives, and our foundation course, which consolidates all of these concepts. A final question to reflect on. What is one thing you're going to do this week to start improving your emotional regulation? Hopefully you've enjoyed a glimpse into the material that we like to discuss in-house, and this video has given you some food for thought. If you've had your curiosity piqued and feel you'd like some support, don't hesitate to seek a referral to our service where we can give you hands-on support. Otherwise, please hang around for the live Q&A session taking place this afternoon, where our coaches can answer any questions that you may have had that have come up from this video or otherwise. Take care and see you then.